The Big Sell Illuminati, where some of the best in the business discuss what's worked, what's working, and what's failed in selling big sales. Our panel of experts includes Clarity Seeker, a black belt of brands, our snarky marketer, Monique de Maio. CEO to CEO selling is his game. Fortune 500 in his lane. The Lex Luthor of the close, Mark Kennedy. The effective executive, a force on the boards, a buyer on fire, Tiffany Olson. David versus Goliath selling, the prince of process, Sun Tzu of big sales strategy, Tom Searcy. And that's your panel. Now it's time to talk about big sales.
Welcome to the Big Sale Illuminati. I am glad that we are here again. The first shout out, I need to tell everybody that Mark Kennedy, the Lex Luthor of the close, will not be with us right now. He just closed a 7-figure deal and he's on a plane to get the ink. So congratulations to him. But we are still here, Monique and Tiffany and I. And today we're going to talk about tests, where you send a test or a pilot or a beta or a sample where you're selling into a company and they have requested, or it's whatever, a test. I don't know any selling people that are saying, I want to get a test or a pilot. I know salespeople that think that, life starts when they get a test, but that's a pilot, but that's a different thing. I want to go to you, Tiffany. You're the buyer on fire. It's people like you who frustrate people like us because you drive towards a pilot or a test. Why?
Well, first of all, Tom, you just made my day because I thrive when I can frustrate you. So thank you. Thank you very, very much. That I know that my purpose in life has now been defined. But the pilot is not necessarily a bad thing, because many times if there are large operational changes or a new type of machine that has to go in, sometimes that pilot is really needed to be able to see if it can actually function in the appropriate environment. And let me give you an instance, because sometimes it's also just very typically the industry standard. And it's something that the marketplace almost demands. And so as a salesperson, you have to kind of get pretty savvy about something. But I'll tell you a story, and then we can kind of pick apart what would have worked better in this situation.
Okay.
But I was a sales manager for Baxter Scientific Products at the time. And what we would use was called the puppy dog close. Now, if you love puppies, you know what this close is, which is just hold it. Just hold the puppy. You don't have to buy it. No obligation. Just hold the puppy. Because you know that as soon as someone holds that puppy, they're going home with the puppy. So anyways, we would use this puppy dog close. But in our industry at the time, it was extremely common and almost necessary for customers to try new reagents, see if it worked appropriately, see if the data measured up to what they needed it to measure up to.
Now, just let me stop. For everybody who's listening to this, what's a reagent?
So a reagent is a really kind of a chemical that you're using in, let's say, a chemistry analyzer or something that's going to tell you, it's a test that's going to give you information on a diagnosis.
Okay, so for a scientific thing like that, I selling to you would completely agree. If I was selling to you in that place, I understand the puppy dog because there's scientific impact on that. If I just switch over from one chemical to another chemical, but okay, so you gave him the puppy dog close.
So let me continue, because there are some, first of all, yes, that's one instance, but there are other types of things, like maybe software. Instead of doing a complete software integration, maybe there is something that you want to, or that the buyer wants to try, just to make sure that they don't completely shut down their whole entire company or their production area. So I think that there are real reasons, besides just maybe wanting to string something along or not make a commitment, but to really help to impact some of that change management. But in my particular example, because I think there's some good things that we can kind of go over, this was about wanting to convert this customer to at least 80% of their business. So set up the trial, did not have any type of legally binding document. It was more of like a little one-page letter of understanding. We'll give you the reagents. You're going to try the product. And if you convert to us, if you start using us, then we're not going to charge you for these tests that you currently have or are using. Manager in the lab willing to try it. Great. Everything's a go. Well, months go by, they still haven't run the tests.
Okay.
So it's a delay. Well, we're short of staff. We don't have somebody to analyze the data, kind of excuse after excuse after excuse. So it went on and was delayed for over 5 months. Then it finally got done and it was good results. So now all that energy of selling and the excitement is gone from the customer. And they ended up bringing us on just for 10% of their business. So our goal was 80. We're at 10, and we're just like, and I think it might have been because they didn't want to pay for the trial. So they, now just giving us little drips and drabs. And it wasn't until over a year. And then they switched to about 50%. So we got about half of their business. But I think some really valuable lessons in how to set up a trial appropriately. And I think we should talk about when a trial is appropriate.
Well, okay. So you said a lot in your story. And I like your story an awful lot. It's kind of like it's a good story. But
did it frustrate you?
No. There's so much opportunity in this conversation. I've got to be frustrated. So here's the thing. You really talked about the good and the bad in the story, right? I mean, the good is, hey, that got us in there. Bad is we got held hostage on the percentage that we got as far as work goes. Good is that we ended up with the work and it took thing. So I would say things that are a thing that I think is really important is that I teach people that the speed of confidence is what affects the speed of close, cash, and scale. If you're going to get the speed of close, cash, and scale higher, you have to increase the confidence. You're using in the industry standard a test or a pilot to increase their confidence. At the end of their confidence, though, the contract does not sound like it was set for a takeover of a certain volume.
Yes, that's exactly correct.
The issue on the confidence also happens in the scale. If you're only 10% of a 90%, who are they going to spend their time with? They're going to spend their time with their 90% provider, not their 10% provider. So you have to have enough scale to matter in the test. Otherwise, and I've seen people do this all the time, we're just going to get in there, we're going to hold the puppy, not in the regulatory side of the house, but hold the puppy. They're going to love us. They already love us. They hate their current vendor. So they're going to transfer all of their work over to us. And then we go do, the client goes and does, 3 to 5% of the spend. And then nothing. Test came back. We did great. And yet there wasn't enough scale to say that it was demonstrable, observable, continued results. And their answer is, we're so busy, we'll get back to this. Can't get to this right now. Hate that. Have to sell past that moment. And it sounds like, I'm not saying that you're people and you didn't try, but we have to take away the learning that you're talking.
Yes, exactly. And I think, when you think about it, the change management on the buyer side of sometimes what it takes to change to someone different can be huge. And that's the piece that I also think from a selling standpoint, thinking through that. How do you help that customer through that change and through that change management?
I've got a story on that, but I wanted to first, and you may already have a story on this one, Monique. In your business, sometimes it's a hard cut. You got to move from one thing to you. And if you don't, or same thing you advise your customers, they don't get to slide in over a period of time and increasing volume. They've got to make a big decision and move now.
Yeah, I think inertia is a powerful thing, and any change is going to be problematic, especially when you're talking about systemic, right? So we do a lot of tech and tech services, and when you're impacting an organization through data, it's going to be, the pain is going to be felt. And for me, I've been on this sort of on the periphery of multiple pilots for, let's just call it a large chip manufacturer, leave it at that. And then, the problem was there was too much change and too much new technology for the buyer to absorb. What if this doesn't work? What if there's a backlash? What if this technology positions us too quickly in the realm of knowing too much about our customer and having privacy issues, right? So if you have a technology that can, for instance, you walk into the room or you walk into the retailer and it identifies me as a petite older woman, wonder how that could happen. And then they sell me immediately, the display comes down to my level, which is possible and happening and doing that right now. And then they are feeding me up an offer in real time to my demographic, psychographic profile based on recognition. That was a little scary at that point in time in the market. So that was a brand saying, whoa, hold on. Are we ready to bite off this, both technology and this expense? But I mean, I think we can bring it back to Tiffany to talk about why buyers mandate pilots other than regulatory, right? In this case, it was a combination of, is the technology too cutting edge? And is the data that's going to be derived from this pilot going to be too far afield from where we are today?
If you're competing against an existing player in the marketplace, that's different than entering in with a disruptive approach like the one that you're talking about.
So here's the thing that people don't get. Just moving a legacy vendor, that's freaking really, really, really hard. Because despite the whining that the client is doing about that vendor, they are probably in bed on a multitude of levels. And sometimes it's actually true. And then sometimes it's just really true. And then sometimes it's really, really true.
Right.
But the reality is they're connected on systems, on billing, on process, on staffing, on backup, all of that stuff. So all of a sudden you come in and be like, I can solve all your problems. You haven't thought through. You haven't even identified where they're connected.
No. Okay, let's not go to the extreme. Listen, the vast majority of the business that I've done and the clients I work with are all taking significant amounts, if not replacing, legacy vendors. They're not disruptive technologies that are going into the marketplace.
Yeah, to moving a vendor that's already established.
Got to move them, and it's hard.
And Tom, when has that been successful and when hasn't been? Because the legacy vendor doesn't require change management.
That's right. So a lot of stories that go with that. But let's start with the idea that we get trapped because there's a legacy vendor and we're going to, and their parameters are always, we don't want to have all of our eggs in one basket. We want to make certain that we've got other vendors that are providing similar or same. We want to get best in class. I mean, take all the, we want to get best in class services and best practices and all the rest of those kinds of cliches that are out there. This happens regularly. I get it. I want us to sell past the pilot. Lots of times people sell to the pilot and then they've got the hold the puppy. Sometimes the hold the puppy is a good strategy. Sometimes it's a cop-out strategy. All right. So when you're selling into replacing a vendor that's out there, the way that we talk about it is the first thing a pilot has to have on the part of the seller is it needs to be of significant size. It has to be big enough that you can see that the results are the kinds of results that you're going to have in the future and that they matter. Secondly, you have to keep whoever the senior executive that you had engaged all the way along. Don't start a pilot that's going to last for 90 days or 900 units or whatever it is. And when you get through with that, call me back. All right. You have to have somebody who's involved in it all the way along. Third thing is you got to negotiate the contract once, meaning you negotiate the full contract. And then you say, inside of that contract, there is a place for what we're going to call the pilot or the startup or the bring in, design, and define, whatever you want to call that phase. And then the last thing is there has to be a declared stair step up in volume.
Tom, what about a penalty?
Well, I'm against them.
What happens if all is good? I agree you negotiate that contract ahead of time, but you start with the pilot trial, step up, whatever you want to call it, and then the customer says, yeah, it's really not working.
So that the penalty part happens a great deal in some of these. The issue is you're negotiating penalty on either side. So your answer is I've invested time, energy, and et cetera. These are the execution responsibilities you have. Here's the execution responsibilities I have inside of the timing and the remainder of that. Now, this is very consistent inside of public works contracts right now, and those kinds of schools and hospitals and other circumstances that have to do with construction, installation of equipment, whenever there's penalties that are inside of that. But I'm not against penalties as long as they're defined for both parties, because I can't be penalized for decisions, choices, and activities that you've made without my involvement. And so that's where I bring that together. I want to go really quickly to a story. So one of our clients sells the ability to identify, secure, and then put out to into the street a team to do the kinds of cabling you see in your neighborhoods for streaming service. Well, actually, for internet services and all the rest of those kinds of things that come in. So they dig in the trenches and they do all the rest of it. But first, like the two of you, they have to sell it. Yeah, switch from XYZ to PDQ. They have to get that sold. Well, this company sells them, installs them, hooks people up. They do the whole thing. All right. Company that wants to have that, of course, says, wait a minute. All right. You're going to bring me people. You're going to install all the stuff and all the rest of it. Great. But I want to make certain that we do a pilot. It said, we don't want to do a pilot. We want to be your preferred vendor. Listen, if this works, you're going to be our preferred vendor. Said, great. 20% of what you're doing right now is indicative of what you'll get in the future and gives us a springboard going forward. They said, okay, that's a little bit bigger than what we want to do, so it's significant. Here's the part of the story that's interesting. After the 90 days, they would have a growth, but at 45 days, they were already beating all the parameters. The company comes back and says, we really want to grow. This is fantastic. But now we got to negotiate the contract. And I was working with them at the time, and I said, tell them that you really want to negotiate the contract, because you're right, the terms aren't very good. You need to raise the price because your performance is better. So if they want to negotiate on the contract, we're ready. How much more do they want to pay? Because we already have a contract. And said we could stick with the contract or we could go negotiate, whichever is you believe is in your best interest. And they laughed and they said, well, okay, fine. We understand. And the answer is, look, we all negotiated in best faith a contract that was fair. All right. We took on the risk that it would be better and we could have charged you more. You took on the risk that we might not have performed as well, and you paid for it. We took on the risk, both of us. We went and did what we were both supposed to do. Let's go forward. And that's how that happened. I think that that's a well-negotiated and thought through approach, because the stair step a volume was already built into the contract. There was still just an if-then clause up front. So had a sponsor, it was significant, negotiated that contract for one time rather than having to negotiate it twice, stair step the volume, life was good. Now, I've had the other experience that Tiffany talked about, which is the one where you get in and we're going to start and they leave all the products sitting on the pallet, sitting at the doorstep, and they never open up the box and start to install. This was a chemical company who was involved in all sorts of various items in which they had shelves and shelves of those chemicals, but they had a pallet of new chemicals and they just never opened the new pallet. So you're fighting every single day at a lower level to get the next step taken.
Yeah, Tom, I think, your advice of that executive sponsor has to be 100% committed. That communication has to be there, because otherwise you do have someone lower in the organization who frankly just doesn't have time and it's extra work for them. And that is never good, because that's really hard to move that through.
Well, so Tiffany, if you were at the head of organizations that mandated and that did pilots. Now we know our audience is facing those types of people. So what is the kind of advice that you would give that serves both parties? Knowing what you know, especially in regulated industries, you're going to have to do some sort of pilot contextually. What is it that salespeople don't know to ask for or don't know to include in their contracts, in their negotiation points? Because I wouldn't know. Like if I sold into pharma, I wouldn't have a clue.
Well, I think a couple things that Tom actually mentioned. So one is scaling Now, sometimes it needs to be significant, but sometimes it might not be able to be as significant as maybe you as the seller would want. However, you can still have those very clear goals and measurements and stair stepping of what that means. The other thing is that the time involved in really taking a look at how, and let's call it like a new instrument, is going to function within a production activity is huge. And many times it's very difficult for the buyer to be able to really know how that's going to work. So it's site visits to other companies, it's talking to maybe even sometimes competitors, which can be a little bit uncomfortable. And sometimes it's just having to get your hands on that and really seeing how that works within your particular process. So things such as helping with the change control, helping with the training, making sure that those things are very clearly defined, really help that buyer to know that they've got that support. And for instance, 24-hour support. So if there isn't a hotline available, and these things are pretty much known in whatever industry if they're needed. So it shouldn't be something that is necessarily a surprise. But for that salesperson selling in, really making clear that these things are going to be the acceptable standard and that they will happen. And that also requires that salesperson to make sure that they do happen because, as we all know, stuff can go wrong.
Well, let me stay on that for just 1 second, Tiffany, because you bring up some things that again, this is the big sale Illuminati. We're talking about big sales. I think about companies that are selling out their multi-million-dollar imaging systems, right? And they're going to go in, they're going to be part of an imaging clinic or part of a hospital. And there's a series that are out there. There is a whole process that starts from, I've talked to someone and I've done some of the things that you're talking about. And I said that confidence comes from the issue of the speed to confidence equals the speed to closing, caching, and scaling. How does that work if I've got this piece that's coming into this hospital and I want to accelerate the adoption, and yet there's a very real and understandable reason why they have to see that it works. So how do we do that?
Yeah, so some of it just takes time. So let's say if you have something that is a 6-month installation, because you have to train people and whatnot. Having a good project manager on both sides and making sure that things really do move forward, and that if there is an issue, you have a clear escalation path.
So those are all issues that work on confidence, that increase the confidence of the
Yes.
buyer.
Right. And sometimes those are speed though too, because let's say that, it's like building anything. You go in this week, but the plumbing isn't available till the following week. Those things will definitely slow it down. So it's how do you make sure, or the IT system, the IT department can't get the software written. And all of a sudden now you're 4 months behind simply because of that one piece. So it's being able to manage on the time through all of those different segments of where things can get hung up. And if they are getting hung up, that you have an immediate voice to that executive sponsor that can then run the traps internally within their own organization.
So Monique, knowing some of the things that you do, how do you handle circumstances that involve A/B testing? So you do message A and message B, test against those, find out what is best, working against maybe already internalized mechanisms that they've got. You deal with a lot of proof points, a lot of confidence points along the way. How do you handle it? How does that work?
Well, it's funny in pilots and in new deployments and replacing vendor new deployments. So all the scenarios that we just talked about before, the biggest challenge for us being part of the negotiation team is what are the KPIs? Being clear on the KPIs and what does success look like for both parties is so critical. And that's where I think we spend a lot of calories, to be honest with you, because in my world, marketing and to some extent sales enablement, it can be very subjective. How many leads, how many conversions, how many conversations, how many touch points, how many engagements? Well, where did they come in? Where did they net out? What happened with them? Where did they turn into customers? Were they large customers? Were they repeat customers? What is the lifetime value of that customer? So it's all of those KPIs and success factors should be negotiated in the beginning. And for us, the whole notion of pilot or small, it's a success. It's a proof of success. And it marries everything that you said. It should be big enough so that it has impact on the organization. So it should be a large line of business.
One of the things, and you said it earlier, and I think for our listeners, it's extremely important, which is negotiate all of this upfront. And negotiate, even when I mention these escalation meetings, you negotiate those. How many times you're going to meet and who is going to be from each side. Because once you've got those, you're smiling. I can see that you're.
No, I'm thinking about the occasions. You finish your statement. I'm smiling because I'm agreeing with you, and I think everybody here because we've got CEOs and here in the room who've been in charge of sales and revenue and all those kinds of things. Your heads have to be banging about the number of times that you've had one of your sales professionals not get that done.
Oh yeah.
And then you're going back and trying to clean up the mess. They're fired up. They're so excited because they just got this pilot. They just got this deal. And your answer is, what have we negotiated? Say, I'm telling you right now, they've told us they're going to go with us.
Right. So the deployment hasn't really been developed well enough that you can point to this thing and say that was successful. And that's what gets them every time. So I've had that happen when I was in ad sales, and my salespeople would be like so excited that they got a contract from this elusive customer that all of a sudden they're like, oh, they're going with us. This is so great. I'm like, okay, great. But what does their success look like? What is the metric by which you will be judged and brought back or thrown out the side door?
So Tiffany, what do we say to the senior exec? I mean, we've all been there. And so you've got these great sales professionals who have been working for months, maybe even years to get this opportunity, right? They get in, their foot in the door, they're going to get to a pilot. How do we protect our company and how do we protect them from their excitement? What I refer to as their pathological optimism.
And sometimes people get so excited toward the end, and they've worked on it for so long that they forget that at that point, that's when the negotiation really probably is one of the most important aspects of it, because you've really got to negotiate those details down, especially on the step up trial, pilot, whatever that may be. And that's where that tenacity really needs to come through. And also it's important for the buyer to have that, because as the buyer, I don't want my people to spend time on something time and energy on something that we're not going to do and that we're not serious about, or that maybe somebody's kind of pet project, but really doesn't help move forward. And all of that does help to flush that out, because you're having them commit. In my particular story, earlier, we had a letter of understanding, but there wasn't any really teeth in it. So it took the customer's time, our time, and if we would have, just made that a little tighter, we might have fleshed out that maybe it was an opportunity or not an opportunity yet, or whatever that may have been, or be able to scale that up much faster. So those things are really important, but it's to take all of that excitement at that point and then turn it into, and I'll say, how does everybody win? So how is the seller going to win? How is the buyer going to win? And contractually putting something together that everybody feels comfortable with, because that's when the nitty gritty really, really happens.
I think you said something really important there about the pet project. I'm going to just step aside for 1 second on that. Goes back to getting the right executive sponsor, getting to the right executive. When you get to someone who is very excited about your technology, your approach, your product, your whatever, and they're pushing towards a pilot, and you realize that they're not going to be the one who signs the final contract, you're selling to the wrong person. What they're doing is they're using you as a proof case to move forward their own interests inside of the company, and they're trying to make themselves important, what you've got. And I refer to those buyers as dreamers, schemers, and fools, because they've got this grandiose belief that if I can get this in, and then they're going to do the double sale, right? They're going to sell us in as a pilot, take that as a proof point, take that up, and then we have to start over again with that person and that data. They're never really the buyer. They are, and they've got this idea of, wow, won't this be? And that's why I call them dreamers, schemers, and fools.
So what do you do with that? So I'm sure the people on the listening to this podcast or watching this podcast are saying, "Oh yeah, been there, done that." You know, the guy that's using me and my technology or my solution or my service or my whatever to make him or herself look better. Blah 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 blah. What is the way to make everybody win in that scenario, including the guy the person who's selling the big sale?
Well, first of all, it's a CXO sale on your side. COO, CFO, CRO, COO, whoever it is that is running that side of the business on your side has to be the one who's very intentional about what are the parameters underneath which you operate.
Okay.
And so, for example, we're in one of our clients is in a deal right now that I have an opportunity to be advising on, and it's with a very, very big company, a name you'd know. And they're going in, they want to do, our company that we're working with wanted to do a pilot. Say that pilot was worth $2 million a year. But the contract is worth $20 million a year. And my statement is, well, actually, the contract would be worth hundreds of millions, but you could move to 20 million very easily. And the person they're talking to is who's supposed to be their executive sponsor can only sign off on $2 million. So that's interesting. Our answer is that we only want to do this if it's a $20 million deal. You're forcing the hand to take them upstream.
Okay.
If they won't take you upstream because of the size of the deal, the size of the interest, they don't have confidence yet. So if you want to get to speed to close, speed to cash, and speed to scale, you have to work on speed to confidence. So my answer is you're only going to get the confidence you want if you move this up to enough big enough size. We want to interest them and push them to get to the real buyer instead of going to an intermediary. That right there takes a lot of your senior executives, because the easy response would be, we'll just do the $2 million and see how it goes. Your answer is, you're talking about somebody who $2 million doesn't even get up the person who's the janitor as far as making a real difference and an impact, let alone anybody else. So I push for bigger in those circumstances, not for less, because it gets me to a higher level buyer and I can have a better level conversation. But you have to have some teeth to do it.
That's a soundbite right there. I mean, seriously.
And it works if you inside your company that's selling are disciplined and confident. If your answer is, I want to get to the 2 million so that I can get this huge contract for the sake of using a name, it's not Amazon. If we just get in, Amazon will not know who you are till you hit to about a $200 million investment. If you think a $2 million contract matters, they don't spend that much, or they can spend that much in one facility on toilet paper in a year. And you want to go ahead and get a national and international contract, you're not going to do it selling toilet paper.
So you're saying, so hold on. So you guys are in different ways are saying this notion of pilot has to come with a lot of confidence. But I think that also plays itself out in a lot of other conversations we've had on this podcast about how sellers need to be grounded in their own confidence and confident in their own service, product, solution, whatever, because it's almost like it's not the he who cares least wins, but it is kind of like, wouldn't the buyer, I'm going to refer back to Tiffany, wouldn't the buyer be kind of interested by a vendor that is so confident that they don't want to sign the $2 million deal and are confident to step away from a $2 million deal because they can?
I would say that as a buyer, if I'm still not comfortable, then they can step away. So I think there's that dance that has to take place, and it has to be that you've got to get that buyer comfortable. And if somebody's willing to step away because the deal's too small and you're only willing to do a deal at a certain size, then you've got to look at others, or bring others in. And sometimes I think, Tom, you were saying, or Monique, just the selling person really has to have that confidence and that knowledge and the flexibility to go to different areas within the customer,
Right.
sell at different areas, or have other people in their organization that can get into different areas, whatever that may be.
Your point is really important on this, and Monique was hitting on it as well. The issue of the confidence, you're giving confidence to the customer. So if they're going small, they are fearful. They do not have confidence. One of the better questions to ask is, when we roll out, it's going to be because you believe certain things. What are the things that you need to believe for us to get the bigger agreement that you do not already have? And so what you're doing there is saying, if I can, in your own mind, you're just saying, if I can remove those fears or replace them with confidence, then it's easier for you, Mr. and Ms. Customer, to move upstream to a larger initial purchase. So if we focus on the fears and flip them into confidence, we will get the scale and we will get a meaningful pilot if that's an absolute requirement.
Well, we're talking about impact here, right? Aren't we? I mean, I think here's the thing that I'm seeing. I think we need to sell not to solution, product, service. We need to sell to impact. And impact equals, the pain point that you're solving for. And so if your language coming into the deal, the pilot, the trial, the whatever is about the solution or the service, you've already missed the boat. It's like, this is the impact that we're going to have on this line of business. And then going back to what Tiffany said, it sounds like if there's not enough impact for the seller in the deal, they're not going to be brought in. They're not going to be brought back. It's like, maybe you sell to another line of business. What's the possibility of doing that? So you can sell to this line of business, and then you can sell to another line of business, and maybe getting 2 or 3 executive sponsors in 2 or 3 lines of business will give you that scalability, but also that impact, so the organization sees it in different places. Now you've got more data, more proof that you're making the impact.
That's right. I use this example with people that are out there in the marketplace that are talking, and they as salespeople or sales professionals are not certain why they're losing. I said, if I told you that if you gave me $10,000, I would give you $100,000 a year from now, what would it take for you to give me 10 grand? So we start working through the idea of, what is it that you would need to know? You would need to know, what's my history? What's my background? You would need to know what my success rate is. You'd probably want to talk to the people that has given me $10,000 in the past. You would go through your due diligence. And if you said to me, I'll give you 2 and we'll see how we do. And I said, no, your minimum investment is 10, but you've gone through all of these steps. I still don't feel comfortable. Fair enough. What is it that you're not comfortable with? Because I'm telling you, you're going to get 100 grand. And if you knew with certainty you would get the 100 grand, I'd have the $10,000 today. The difference between these is the difference of your certainty. What are you uncertain about? And that drives the conversation away from how great our benefits are to what is holding them back from a much larger purchase. By the way, I want to say thank you to our buyer on fire.
Yeah.
Because we have carnivores as sales professionals. If we're working with companies that have got salespeople, they're carnivores, we're carnivores, and et cetera. And you're saying behind the scenes, look, I got reasons. I've got this. This is not just me being mercurial or being, doubtful of everybody. This stuff's real, and I got to deal with it. So if I can summarize, and you throw in what you've got out of today's conversation, we've talked about the idea that there are regulatory or brand or market requirements in some cases to have pilots or beta tests or whatever. We talked about the need to negotiate upfront the contract once as best you can that says that the if then. As we work, we've already negotiated upfront. You got to keep an executive sponsor along the way so that they don't just throw out the test to somebody who's lower level, wait for the results, and then we go ahead and become a part of the echo chamber of the world. That people are going to they're going to buy faster. They're going to buy it with a bigger amount of money and a larger amount of work based upon the cash, based upon the confidence. We're the ones who want the cash. They're the ones who want need the confidence. We've got to focus on the confidence of making those things happen so that they believe that they are true. And I think that this idea of internal versus external that Monique was talking about, you're dealing with their internal resources or competitive resources. You have to set up the kind of win example, the metrics or KPIs, as you referred to them, Monique, to know that in fact, at the end of any set of circumstances, you've proven that you're the better choice. Any other summary points that anybody wants to make?
Actually, what I would say is that the big takeaway from these points is you have to do more work up front. You have to do more work up front. And that's where if you've gotten to a certain point in the sale and it's really exciting, you're just at the plateau and you still have the rest of the mountain to climb. I think that's a really good takeaway to remember.
That's great. All right, everybody. Great session. Love being with everybody. We wish our best to Mark, and we'll see him on the next episode. To everybody else, we wish our best on big sales. This is the Big Sale Illuminati. Thanks.
Thanks for listening to the Big Sale Illuminati podcast. If you like this episode, give us a thumbs up and let us know in the comments. Also, be sure to subscribe to the podcast on whatever platform you're listening on. Until our next episode, best wishes on your big sales.